Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome back to class. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. I believe we have a lot of newcomers in today's audience, and I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us for the first time. Today, we are going to start a new course that is Business Skills Fundamentals. And before we get started, I'd like to cover a few important instructions on how we are tracking your attendance. Kindly listen to all instructions carefully. We are considering dual attendance marking method to track your attendance. Your hourly attendance is based on the amount of time you spend on Zoom, and daily attendance will be marked on Prism for accessing the content from the portal. In case you're not able to attend the live session, you can watch the recorded version of same on Prism, and we will consider your attendance for watching the complete recorded session. The video recordings are available for a limited period, and you can access these videos from 7 p.m. until 10 a.m. of the subsequent day. In case you don't attend the live session, you will receive absenteeism notification email the following day from your university. Kindly ensure that the same email registered with the university is being used on Zoom and on the Prism portal at all times. So now I'm going to quickly demonstrate on how to log into Zoom because a couple of participants logged in to the session last week using the illustration link and their attendance was not captured properly. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here's my screen, guys. This is nothing but the page, the content page on Prism. All you need to do is click on this link to log into Zoom. You'll get this page where you need to enter your first name, your last name, your email address. This should be the same email address that you've used to register on Prism, and that will be your university email address. Once you click on join webinar in progress, you'll get a page that looks like this. So you will get a link for you to join in. So what we noticed last week, a lot of you used this link to join the session instead of using your unique link, and your attendance got captured against Nick's ID. So in case you're using this link to join the session, I would advise you to go back and use this link to join the session because I still see a lot of you are logged in as Nick. I think I have close to 20 of you who are logged in as Nick instead of logging in as yourselves. In case you guys have any doubts, feel free to reach out to us through chat option on Prism, or you can write us an email at teamdxp@knowledgehut.com. Post the session, guys. Ensure that right now you're concentrating on the session and not on your attendance. Uh, During the session, you'll be on listen mode only. And if you have any questions, please drop your questions in the Q&A box. Now, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Graham Phelps, for today's session. He is a business skills consultant, trainer, and author. Welcome, Graham.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning. So I'd like you to introduce yourself to our audience, and post the introduction, we can start off with the session.
Okay, yes, good morning. And it's a real pleasure to be here and see so many people arriving. That's fantastic. My name is, as said, Graham Phelps. I work as a specialist business trainer and consultant. I've been a main board director of some large organizations, but today I help share the knowledge and guide people and companies to become more effective and more successful. So I'm really thrilled to be here today. In the last 20 years, I have probably presented to a great many people, and a lot more today and this week as well. So we've got some really, really interesting topics for you coming up. Okay. Did you want me to start my slides now, Anisha?
Yes, yeah, we can start off with the slides.
Okay, let's do that. So I'm just going to share my screen and then we can get started into today's content. Hopefully everyone can see that. So this week we're looking at business skills training. I know last week we looked at people skills very much, but this week it's about those key areas of a business or an organization. So here's a short summary. Once again, you'll see this in the slides of my background. I've also written a number of books on business organization and training. And my profession is marketing. That's where I grew up and got my degree. I have since moved into many different fields, though, as you will see. So, those of you that are using Zoom for the first time or some sort of online communication, if you have any questions or queries, I'm sure the team at Knowledge Hub will be able to help you. There will be a question and answer session at the end. So please send those comments or queries through your question and answer box. There will be a daily recall quiz at the end of each session, and we will review those the following morning. So you have a chance to do that after each of the presentations. So if you have any questions or queries about the content or indeed the format, the team here can help you. So let me give you an overview of these 5 days we have coming up. Today is all about project management. This is an essential area for many businesses and business managers. Then we follow that looking at marketing. Its close relation, of course, is sales. Then we will move on to strategic management and executive planning, followed by what I call customer centricity. In many ways, these are the 5 pillars of any organization. The overall goals for this week is to give you the principles of effective management, to give you a really good understanding of how marketing works, and particularly the dynamics of product promotion, pricing, and branding. When it comes to selling, we're looking at the key skills and methods that people use when they're trying to persuade others, either in a business selling or a consumer selling market. Session 4, day 4, is looking at strategic management, KPI management, and goal setting. And then finally, the secret of organizations like Apple and Amazon will be looking at customer centricity and what is customer service excellence. To put it into context, these are the modules we will be covering. You can see today we are looking at the introduction to project management, followed by context and processes. And I'm not going to go through all of these now, but we will review these at the beginning of each day. Now, I appreciate that some of you certainly will be more concerned with some topics than others. But the important thing is you have a broad understanding of all these different concepts if you are going to manage and successfully develop your career. Each of these areas are essential for a manager or an executive building in a successful organization. If you need to understand how projects are run, how marketing works, how sales works, strategic planning and linking those to goals, and finally, the importance of creating a customer focused team, department, and organization. It's a very exciting week we've got for you. And so, without any further ado, I'd like to get started. Introduction to project management. The 3 areas that I've mentioned are really a baseline understanding of what really is project management and what is the role of a project manager, the context that project management works in a business, and then finally, some of the tools and techniques and methodologies of project management. During this session, I'll be using a number of examples. As I said, there'll be a Q&A session at the end of this. We will be taking a break, as you know, if you were in last week's session, at around 45, 50, no, let me get this right. Halfway through the session, we will take a 30-minute break. Okay, now, the purpose of this first module is that you really understand the principles of project management and some of the most important techniques involved, and particularly how a project can be started and managed. Many people think of project management as perhaps a normal part of their daily work, and it isn't. Project management has a discipline and a skill set all of its own. My background was in the IT industry. I started out marketing and selling computer systems when they were first designed for businesses, microcomputer systems. We are talking now in the early 80s. I began to move into computer system marketing. Here we created very large scale, very expensive networks for banks and financial institutions, costing many millions of pounds and dollars. Each of these was a project, and each of these had a project manager, in some cases, many of them, and project teams. So I had a first hand experience of working on these projects at a very early stage in my career. In fact, one of the companies I used to work for was called Hoskins, and they invented a system called Project Manager Workbench. Not quite as famous as it used to be, but in the 80s, it was the course to go on. It was the methodology that everyone in IT used. So I'm going to go through this list of things you can see on the screen. If some of the phrases seem a little bit strange now, I will explain them fully in the next hour or so. Things like progressive elaboration, the interrelationship of project management and general management concepts, the difference between program management and portfolio management, what is a project management office, and the multiple modes of operation within a PMO. So let's start with the basics. What is a project? What are projects? Well, a project is essentially the way someone organizes managing resources necessary to complete a large, discrete task. So a project is an individual piece of work. It's something that has a definite finished objective and most likely a series of milestones. This is what differentiates a project from normal work. It's not a process or normal everyday operation. The consideration of an effective manager or executive in an organization today involves looking after three P's. The first one is people, the second one is processes, and the third one is projects. Now, senior managers may often delegate these operations to others, which is a very good plan. Nobody is good at everything. But understanding the dynamics of project management is very important. One of the most important considerations about a project is that it's a unique event. It also has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it has a definite finishing point. So, for example, sourcing a new warehouse facility is a project. Managing the warehouse facility is a process. It's not a project in itself. Let me share some other examples with you. So, for example, we've mentioned the experience of a computer installation and upgrades. Now, clearly, organizations today are run by IT and technology. Major installations such as ERP systems and SAP systems can be a massive undertaking and a major expense. Smaller upgrades are also necessary, and each of these is a discrete project. Building works, new product design and launches, as we mentioned in marketing, these are projects. Maybe a new advertising campaign. Any kind of event, from a small meeting or conference for your organization to a major gathering. And then finally, strategic changes in the business. These can be seen as a project. So, for example, if you were going to set up a new distributor network or launch into a new part of the country or a different region, or make some infrastructure changes to your business, this is a large task that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, there are three considerations of a project. The three most important considerations that a project manager goes to bed at night sleeping and thinking about, and wakes up in the morning thinking about. They are cost, time, and specification. Imagine these as 3 points on a triangle: cost, specification, and cost, and price. Sorry, price, deliverables, and quality. So these are the three dynamics, the three legs of a stool, if you like. Depending on the project, will depend on the relative importance. Is it necessary to bring the project in to a particular specification or quality standard? Is it more important to bring it in on budget? Is it more important to bring it on schedule on the time that it's been promised? Now, a good project manager makes sure that all three of those areas are committed to and delivered. And this is the measure of a good project manager. Now, how do they do it? That's the key. On this screen here, we can see the 5 processes which are unique to project management as opposed to operations. They are initiating or starting, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and then finishing or concluding the project. We call it closing. Now, the starting of a project normally starts with clear objectives, finite resources, and some form of kickoff meeting or meetings involving stakeholders. Definition of stakeholder will follow shortly. The planning is what everyone thinks about when they hear of project management, and clearly that's really important. There's a phrase we use in project management, which is that success takes planning. Failure just happens by itself. So proper planning is important, but then so is execution. One of the challenges of a project manager is to know when to switch from planning to doing. I once saw a sign in an office that said, "Plan well, execute better." If a project overruns, it's probably because they didn't start the doing soon enough. You can overplan, you can underplan, but it's probably more common to overplan. Now, once your project's running, when the plane's in the air, you need to monitor it and control it. And the best way of doing that is setting in place mechanisms and people to check things. And we will discuss that in the session after the break. And finally, when the project's delivered and everything's done well, now it's time maybe for a celebration, but it's also time to reflect and consider lessons learned and what went well. Because there will be another project along soon, almost certainly. So the role of a project manager is about bringing people together. The qualities of a good project manager are good communication skills, the ability to problem solve and make decisions, usually as part of a team. It is not necessary for the project manager to make every decision or be an expert on everything. They will, however, need a good technical knowledge of the subject or discipline you're working in. So, for example, if you were overseeing an installation of a new computer upgrade, it would be useful to know something of software and also user requirements. If you were implementing a safety review, then you would need to understand some of the elements of safety, of course. The key skill of a leadership project management today is the ability to coach others, train, delegate, facilitate, not so much instruct. The modern workforce today, with the use of the internet and many other tools, is able to be much more self-sufficient. So what they need from a project manager is guidance and motivation. Now, progressive elaboration is a strange expression, but what it means is that as a project manager moves into a project, you will uncover increasing levels of detail. Imagine an upside down pyramid, if you will. So you start out very broad. This is what we're looking to achieve. And every level that goes down, you can think of them as phases, you discover more about what is required and more about some of the problems too. So, this progressive elaboration, it allows a project management team to really define work and manage it to a much greater level of detail as the project evolves. So, let's consider the example of a product development team. A few years ago, I was researching and looking at the way Apple works. And this is in the time when Steve Jobs was still in charge. And their product development was extraordinary. They put to one side considerations of time and cost, and their priority was quality and specification. This is things like the iPhone and the early iMac, the MacBook series of products, which are and still and were groundbreaking in their day. So they would leave no stone unturned looking for the best approach. And the level of detail they got to was extraordinary. And this is what made them so successful. Many of the products, if you can remember back, were late. Many of the products were expensive, and they often struggled to make money in the early days of the product. However, they knew that if they got the quality right, particularly the devil in the details, they would be successful. So make sure that as you develop a project, whether you are working in it or managing it, you progressively get to more and more detail. Here's another example. One of the stories is that when IBM were making one of their computer systems, they outsourced the manufacture of the cases to a Japanese company, and they specified the case should be white. The Japanese company then sent them a series of samples of 27 different shades of white and asked IBM to pick one. Now, clearly, there isn't going to be too much difference between the 27, but a good project manager progressively looks at the detail because the detail make for success. So the the process of doing that is through beginning to look at all the aspects of every part of the project. Now, let's look at this for a moment from the point of view of how do we manage projects with a general management approach? Well, the first thing we know that the general management approach is often geographically dispersed. So you may have different projects going on in different locations on different topics. Communication is the oxygen of a project. Communication is what makes for a successful management business too. So there's no difference there. Communicate frequently and proactively. Use every communication channel you can find: email, web, telephone. Obviously, video conferencing has had a huge impact in the last few months around the world. And I think this will continue. It seemed to have set a new standard for two things: the frequency of communication, but also the quality. Now, clearly, face to face communication is a preference from many managers and many staff. That physically is not possible, and I don't think will be possible or even preferable in the next few years. Maybe restrictions on travel, or indeed difficulty of travel, combined with the ease of this form of communication, means that you can have regular meetings during the day easily and quickly. There is no reason why somebody should not communicate instantly and effectively using all of these different tools and technologies. And there will be other software platforms as well that we can't cover today. Things like Yammer and Slack and these tools, which will allow almost instant and constant communication as if you were in the same room as somebody. Now, one of the key principles, and I like you to really remember this at the bottom, it says, never let the boss be surprised. And this is so important. Many years ago, one of the largest projects I was involved in the early days was a big project with American Express. And American Express is a very, very sophisticated and a very clever organization. And we had a project kickoff meeting, and down one side of the room was about 7 or 8 of my company's IT specialists, and down the other side of the room was 7 or 8 or so of their senior managers, stakeholders, and IT specialists. And we ran a facilitation session around the topic of what does a good project look like. And by the way, I would definitely recommend this as an activity whenever you run a project, whether you're leading or following. Suggest that somebody somewhere runs a discussion around what does a good project look like. List all their ideas and then put them in order of priority. So this is what we did. What does a good project look like? And we put all these things down, things like keeping to budget, hitting the deadlines, staying in touch, communication. And do you know what came out as number one? No surprises. No surprises. And both sides committed that whenever they discovered something or found something out or something came to mind or something came to happen, they had to communicate it instantly. And at no point does someone have to find something out through discovering or asking, or sometimes, where it happens where someone lets slip something that they shouldn't have done. People find out by accident. So that was our number one criteria for that project. No surprises. And it probably won't surprise you that that project was extremely successful and the relationship with American Express went on for many years. Because as soon as you hear of a problem or an issue, the earlier you hear of it, the better you can solve it. So this is really, really important. Now, the other thing that we need to understand about a project is some of the characteristics. Multidisciplinary. What that means is you're going to have a lot of different folks in the project with lots of different skill sets. You're going to have finance, technical, engineering. You might have a marketing person or two. And they're all going to be slightly different personalities. The project itself will probably be complex. So many times in a project, you get into so much detail and so many variables, it kind of gives you a headache. You need to be able to cope with that level of complexity. And by the way, the more you do it, the better you get. The third box down on the bottom left is conflict. You cannot be on a project team without, let's say, discussing things in a lively way. So good conflict is important, but it needs to be positive. We had a rule in many of the teams I work with, which went like this. You can come up with any criticism, you can name any problem, so long as you have one suggestion for an improvement or an idea. And this actually made people really think. So if they turn around and said, look, this isn't working, or I don't think this is a good idea, when the project coach turned around and said, so what do you think is a good idea? They would have to name something. And this stops people falling into the category of being a critic without being constructive. And finally, another characteristic that many project teams are in a matrix organization. So people will belong to many different projects and you will be fighting for their time as a resource. So this is a challenge too. So let's take this in the context of building a physical premises. If you were refitting out a factory or a warehouse facility, the specialists involved, be them architects, builders, electricians, designers, will not, in many cases, be working exclusively on your project for the whole of the time the project's running. So you will need to commit their time when you need it. So it's part of a program of projects. It also means as a manager, you may have several projects running on at the same time, which also means a great demand on your time. Time management is a key skill of a project manager. So let's look at this idea of the project manager being a facilitator. Now, the project manager may or may not have a coach. A project management coach is somebody who advises the project manager, mentors them, helps them, and guides them. And on larger projects, it's a very, very good idea. Can be quite stressful. There can be a lot of pressure in managing a large project. So having somebody to second opinion to support you is invaluable. We mentioned earlier on that it's a good idea not to take on every problem and every decision yourself. So facilitation is a way to involve people to do this collectively. So as you can see here from the flowchart, the manager as supervisor versus a manager as a facilitator. This is a difference between telling people what to do and guiding them through discussion. Rather than saying, this is what I want you to do, you have a conversation about what could we do? Now, clearly, you need good team members that are knowledgeable, have the resources, technical, and time to implement these things. If time is really pressured and somebody doesn't have the right level of knowledge, well, then clearly somebody would need to step in and say, this is how I want it done. But the project manager cannot be everywhere all the time. Micromanagement is not an option for a project manager. You will burn out and your project will fail. You have to begin to set people clear responsibilities, clear levels of accountability, and then get out of their way so they can do a good job. If they need training in something, train them. But do not try and do everything yourself. Facilitate. Now, that doesn't mean to say you let go of a responsibility, but you do have to ask people for their opinions and discuss it with them. Here's a thought on this. I call it the 3 C's, the 3 C's of project management. The first one is to command. The second one is to consult. And the third one is by consensus. So, command. This is my way of doing it. This is how I want it done. The consult is, what do you people think? What do you think is a possibility? How would you do it if this was you? And you listen to people and then take an advisement as to what we should do. But it's still your decision. The consensus is more about a show of hands. It's going with the flow of what everybody else thinks. Now, this is empowering for the team. And if you can build a team of people who are good and you can build a consensus approach for some decisions, you will do well as a project manager. Here's a little diagram that shows how this might work. In the center is the project manager. To one side, you have a client, or let's say key stakeholder, and this could be an internal client within your organization. Then you have the project team. You have your manager and management that you need to report to, but you also may have some outside bodies that you look after. These could be suppliers, they could be the community, they could be maybe authorities and legal aspects as well. So these are the different ways of communicating. And a project manager is going to be a bit of a scarce resource, flying from one meeting to another, one call to another, and particularly when things get challenging, when costs begin to creep up over the budget, when delays happen, when operational or quality issues occur, the communication needs to be turned right up. As much as a project manager may want to put the blankets over their head and stay in bed that day, you need to face the music, as they say, when things are going wrong. And this takes, by the way, the difference between an average project manager and a good one. It's how well you can deal with the communication of, let's say, bad news. Okay, bad news. And every project has one, right? Every project at some point has something that doesn't happen the way it should or the way you wanted it to. Even a supplier letting you down and those sort of things. It's also unlikely that a manager will have just one project. What's interesting is once you get good at project management, or rather, you become known as being good at project management, executives seek you out and give you more work. So you end up with a range of different projects. Now, you can see here the base level is quality deliverables. So you deliver the project on time, on budget, and to specification. Tick the box, fantastic job. The next level up is you begin to add value to the stakeholders. You really deliver value. You increase, you over exceed in the things that matter in a project. And you begin to put together multiple projects that combine to achieve a real benefit to the people involved. So, for example, if you were implementing that large computer system and the stakeholders are the users and the managers of the information it produces, you could combine several projects: the design of the software, the implementation, the training of users, the fine tuning or the streamlining of business processes. Each of those is a discrete project. You combine them, and the overall effect is fantastic. And you will become known for that. You'll become famous for the person that created that value for the stakeholders. At the top level, the portfolio management, as you can see here, is where you start to run projects which are very closely aligned or supportive of major business goals. And this is the highest level of project management. You will be given a project that is strategically important to your organization, to the point where its success or failure will dynamically impact the future of that business. Let's give you an example. Let's imagine you become the next to Jonathan Ives, the lead designer in Apple, and you are given a project to manage the development of the replacement for the iPhone. Now, none of us know what on earth that's going to be. How will you replace whatever the smartphones today are so amazing? I can't imagine anything even better than an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever other phone you're using. But somebody somewhere is working on a project for the next iPhone. Now, you get that right, there's billions of pounds of revenue. If you get that wrong, well, the organization may not survive 10 years. Does anyone remember Nokia? Probably not, right? If we were doing this course 10, 15 years ago, many of you would have a Nokia phone and possibly a BlackBerry. Because those companies did not manage the development of the new product successfully, they're not where they should be, right? So project management at the portfolio level is where you should aim if project management is somewhere you would like to be in the future. It's very important. And I'll be happy to take any questions on that going forward. A senior level project manager is a key element to any organization, a key asset, I should say. Now, every good project manager has what they call a project management office. Now, this is not the office they use where they sit and do their day-to-day work. Often a project manager will be very mobile, shall we say. They're out and about, they're moving around, they're in different offices, they're seeing people. But a project management office is one room or a series of rooms, in some cases a whole building, a whole suite or floor of offices where people come together to work on the project. The walls will be covered with charts and whiteboards. There'll be all the documentation you need in there, probably a hot desking facility. And one of the keys to this, by the way, is to have it available for anyone to work in at any time. And I mean anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Projects will often go into that mode, particularly towards the last part of a project. When you get a project office together, it should also have, depending on preference, a good supply of tea, coffee, water, and possibly fruit. We'll probably all like biscuits, but they're not good for us. We know that. So it's fruit. And you often see this if you walk around, as I did last year, the offices of Google here in London. And there's these project management offices, and there's big areas, and they've got lots of coffee machines, lots of soft seats and bean bags and whiteboards and glass screens and coffee and fruit and table tennis table for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it's where people come together in huddles to work on problems. And you can achieve the same thing virtually, of course, whether you're using Teams or GoToWebinars or meetings or Zoom. You can have the thing set up all the time. I know I've done this recently, and people just have a number and they log in and log out, and you can chat to whoever is in the Zoom or the GoTo meeting environment or Teams environment, and people drop in and out. Now, there's a really good book, and there's a new form of project management. I say new, it's quite established now, and it's by a gentleman called. I'll show you this book here. Okay, it's this one here. It's on the reading list I've got together for you. Dr. Jeff Sutherland. It's called Scrum, and it's rethinking the project management model. Very much around the IT model, but it works with everything. And one of the key elements of Jeff's approach, and he kind of invented this, right, is that every single day at a set time, everybody on the project meets together in the project management office or in the project management meeting room, online meeting room. No exception. If you can't get there physically, you have to dial in. Now, when I was working in the software industry, we had one particular large project we were working on, and it was for a major UK bank. It was probably over £10 million worth of project, which wasn't that large a project, but it was particularly strategic for the bank. It would allow them a major strategic advantage in terms of commissions and competitiveness in their customer base. We would meet every single day at 4:00 in the afternoon in this one small office. And every single day we would do the Scrum idea. And this is a Scrum idea, is you review what you've been working on that day. What have I done today on this project? That's question number one. Question number two is, what have you got planned tomorrow? What are you doing tomorrow on this project? And number three, and this was a really interesting question, who or what has got in your way? And often it was somebody in the room. It was somebody else in the project. So you'd say, all right, today I have achieved this, this, and this. Tomorrow my plan is to get that done, but I'm still waiting for John to come back to me with the figures. I've asked him 3 times a day and he hasn't done it yet. And John is standing next to you, right? Now, this is communication doubled. This is fantastic. Now, John would usually at this point look down at the ground, apologize, and say, I'll do it for you before I go home. But the interesting thing is because we knew that everybody would be held to account in public, nobody let things slip. People did things they were promising to do, or if they didn't, if they couldn't do it, they said, I can't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. And this led to some really dynamic effects in the project management team. So the first physical place, the first thing you should do is set a physical place for your project to come together physically with the team. It doesn't have to be a fancy office, but it does have to be somewhere. It does also create what I call an irrational optimism. In many cases, a project doesn't go well, and it doesn't go well lots of the time. Okay, so you need to keep the faith, you need to keep hope in your heart. And on your own, that can be difficult. But when you combine it with the others and you hear the ideas and you talk it through, you can overcome those obstacles, put out the fires, and make trade-offs and compromises. It's also where you can ask for resources. If you need more time, need more budget, you need help, you need things changed, there's the way of doing it. You haven't got to store it up and think about when's the next time I'm going to see the project manager, or when's the next time I'm going to see Ahmed. Nope, you can do it every single day in the project management office. Very important little principle. Um, and just to develop this further, the combining of the project management office with the style of management, supporting, controlling, and directive. If you're going to run major projects, if you're going to run multiple projects, you are going to need to do more supporting, a little bit of controlling, and a little bit less directing. You need to give people ownership, you need to guarantee their autonomy, and you need to break teams into small units. A project team tends to work best around 3 to 7 people. Now, I've worked on computer project teams of over 100 people, but they've all been broken down into much smaller units. Easier to manage, they feel more able to control their own domain, and there's less hiding for problems, shall we say. Okay, the controlling aspect is about, as you would be aware, things like mitigating of risk and management of risk, setting standards of behavior and communication, but also profiling and making sure you understand where the excellence and competences in your team. One of the key things you can do at the start of a project meeting, or indeed when you're interviewing staff to go on your meeting, on your project team, is to ask them what their strengths are and really understand what they're good at. One of the questions I would always ask in a project team as it was developing is, what skills have you got or knowledge do you have that you're not using properly in this team? What could you be doing that you're not currently being asked to do? And that would often uncover some really hidden talents and skills. And finally, have an approach that asks people, what do you need help with? Delegate responsibility, but delegate it with accountability. And share tasks. Make sure that people can share tasks with each other as well. And this can all happen in the project management office. It's amazing how many problems can seem so difficult individually, but when we work as a team or come together as a team and talk it through, the ideas of how to solve it seem so much better. I've always thought of project management is a series of challenges and a series of issues that somehow you get through to deliver things on time, on budget, and to specification. And halfway through, you really don't think it's going to happen, but then somehow it does. So the key tool that we look at in this operation is a little bit of jargon. It's called a WBS. It's a work breakdown schedule. It's the first formal planning document a project manager will produce in many cases. It's a work plan. It's how the goals are going to be achieved, by whom and when. It's a schedule of works, as they would call it in the building industry, and also sometimes in the IT industry. So it lists all the tasks involved in a project. It allocates the responsibility for each task and when each of those tasks will be completed. Additional columns, if it's a spreadsheet, can be allocated towards scope, task sequencing, budgeting, dependencies, clear definitions of work, and so on. So for example, if one of the pieces of work was, let's say, a user survey to understand the most important requirements from the user's point of view, if we're talking through our computer project, then who is responsible for that? When do they need to get it done by? And what is the key information they need? And how much can they spend? Both in time and in money, as something that perhaps could be outsourced to a third-party supplier. So this work down schedule, as you can imagine, can get quite large and quite detailed. But it becomes what we call the baseline. Now, a baseline is the starting point. It's the schedule, it's the cost, it's the scope. it's the, if you like, the situation report, as it's sometimes known. Um, some project managers, think of it as a work of fiction. It's a dream. It's what you would like it to be, but it is important to start with a baseline management model of what the project should look like if it's going to be successful, right? Now, as I said before, it's almost certain that it's based on some form of speculation or some sort of estimates of many, many different things. And many of the detailed aspects of a project you don't really know until you get further into the project. Um, there's a phrase that's often used about known unknowns and unknown unknowns. It's all rather confusing. But basically, the cost baseline report tries to anticipate likely expenditure and then perhaps less likely expenditure that we can allow for. It also tries to foresee where things may take longer than they would be hoped to take, where the delays might occur. Now, here in the UK, there's a very interesting project. When I say interesting, that word itself is of double meaning. The HS2 project. They want to put a high-speed railway between London and a town called Birmingham. Now, I don't quite understand why this is so difficult. In France, they now have high-speed trains linking Paris down with Marseille in the south of France. Japan is covered with high-speed trains. China has been building high-speed trains. Korea, we seem to struggle. And the project now is estimated to be twice the original budget, and it's going to take twice as long. It's going to take another 15 years before it's finished or something. It should have been finished in 7. So somewhere along the line, somebody didn't really anticipate some of these issues. Now, I'm sure it'll be a very fast train and it'll be lovely and it'll be very comfortable, but let's still hope we're using trains by the time it's finished. Now, it is necessary, if you're a project manager, to be good at these 3 things: negotiation, conflict resolution, and persuasion. If you think back to that 4-point diagram I showed you earlier on, you will need to negotiate with your client, your stakeholders, your management. You will need to overcome conflict issues within your team of project management team. You will also need to persuade and influence and sell. You will probably at some point need to ask for more investment, for a change in timescales, for certain aspects of the project to be changed in terms of specification. These skills are essential. Now, you probably have some of these already, but trust me, you need to have really good negotiation skills. You need to have very thick skin when it comes to conflict resolution, and you need to have the charm and the influence and persuasion to get results and get resources. My suggestion, by the way, is to build a network of people in an organization and a supplier base who are on your side, so that when you go to them and ask for favors, you ask for more and ask for changes, the goodwill is there to do it. It's a very important principle. Most of your time as a project manager will spend in these 3 areas. You would love to spend it in nice, happy meetings, but trust me, you'll spend more time saying, no, that's not good enough, or can we have this, please? It's a very important principle. So here are a few things to think about. If you want to get a career or develop your project management skills, well, there are certain key qualities. We just mentioned 3 of them. There are things you need to be good at. You need to be particularly good at detail and IT planning, but at the same time, you need to be good at the people skills and soft skills. Your experience, particularly in the area of projects you are going to be managing, whether it's building, IT, services, if you have a technical competence in that area, that will really help you. Your ability to manage a project team, start small and grow. And then finally, there are qualifications you can gain, of course, in terms of project management excellence. It's a discipline, it's a profession like any other, like being a doctor or an architect. In fact, on larger building projects, the success of the project is down to two key people. One is the architect, and the second is the project manager. So let's look at some project management and general management concepts again. In the context of a project, this is now the second part of the modules we're going into. In terms of, let me just pause there for a minute. Let's go back and make one comment here. A general manager manages people and processes and projects. They may employ or oversee project managers to look after the detailed projects and different tasks and events. A project is a discrete large task that has three considerations: either cost, delivery, and specification or quality. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it stops. A process is ongoing, it's continuous. It's not a project in that regard. It may have a cost that you have to manage, it may have deliverables of cost, and obviously quality and specification, but the time it just keeps going. So installing a new machine in a factory is a project. Managing that machine is a process. Hiring a new team of, let's say, IT support staff is a project. Managing the IT support team when they're on board is a process. And there are different skills required from general management to project management. A project manager needs to have a certain amount of drive and, let's say, a need for adrenaline. A project manager's life is not always a quiet one. If you like dealing with challenges and problems and coming up with ideas and solutions, you will be good at project management. If you dislike difficulty, change, and troubles, then maybe stay with general management. Because project management, trust me, it will give you a lot of work, but a lot of satisfaction. So make sure you understand the two different characteristics. And a good project manager is worth a fortune of gold to an organization. Because if you want something done as a general manager, if you need a task or an event or something changed, bringing in a good project manager to do it is vital. In the bigger world, just for a moment before we move on, some organizations, particularly perhaps non-commercial organizations, have a lot of good process managers, but they're not able to change. They're not able to diversify, and they're not able to reinvent themselves or move forward. That's because they don't have the project management expertise. As far as everything is going well, they're fine. As soon as they need to change something, then they need project management expertise. Think of your company or organization. Are there movers and shakers? Almost certainly. So let's look at, if you have questions on that, by the way, you will be able to ask those as we go through and at the end of the session. Now, module 2, having now got the introduction sorted, now that we have a good foundation grasp of what a good project management is, if you like, let's look at the context and some more terminology. In this topic, in this area, we're going to look at what we call the project life cycle. We're going to look at the phases of the project life cycle. Going to go into more detail around stakeholders and stakeholder management. This has now become very, very important in project management. The varying types of structure within an organization: functional, matrix, and projectized, which is difficult to say, but I'm doing my best. Now, the last one, by the way, you don't really have a choice on. it's something your organization will have adopted as its style of management. Now, the outcome for this is that a project will change over time. And the way you manage that change with different team structures is part of what we're talking about here, the context. Very often in the project teams I've worked in, we've lost people. They've been stolen by other projects, or they've decided not to work on our project. They've gone off to somebody else's. I remember once I joined an organization, and I was given the job, and they said, right, the first thing you need to do, Graham, is go to find a project to work on. So I spent 6 weeks sort of sitting around in project meetings and talking to project managers until I found a project, not only that I would like, but that would actually accept me. And I know that today in Facebook, they do the same thing. You can apply to go and work in a different team, and you have a 2-week window of changing your mind, or the manager changing their mind, and you're going back to the old team. But it means they have a lot of variety and a lot of skill sharing going on. So communication, but also flexibility is key in today's organization. Now, just want you to look at this graph for a moment. We've got about 15 minutes for the break, and I want to just cover off a few of these things because they're very, very important. So this is a project life cycle. So you start off with the initial cost and staffing at quite low. A project may start with a limited number of people with a limited budget. But as it goes through its life cycle, it begins to build and build and build. Now, most of the work is done, as you can see, in the last 50% of the project. Now, let me just tell you what reality is. Reality is that probably around 80% of the work of a project can be done in something like the last 20% of the time involved. Now, this sounds ridiculous. So if I've got 3 months to launch a new computer system and design it and deliver it, why would I leave everything to the last 3 weeks? Well, probably because I've misused the time in the early part of the project. I may have taken too much time to plan. I didn't take enough time to recruit staff quickly. I got distracted by smaller details too soon. Remember, the idea of progressive elaboration is the detail comes out later. Do not waste time at the beginning of the project thinking about every possibility. The possibilities will arise. This is a bit like, I liken this to when most of us did our exams when we were doing our studies. We had plenty of time to revise, but somehow it was that last few days before the exam that we worked so hard. And the same is true of a project. So this is the life cycle of a project, and it's very important to understand the dynamics of this. Make sure that the work element extends as early in the project as possible once you've done sufficient organizing and planning. And by the way, the closing of a project in most cases is an administration function. So, quick momentum and slow finish. That is the preference for a good project. If you do work early in a project, you have less adrenaline, less cortisol running around your blood system, and you're more likely to deliver it on time and on budget. So this is not the plan we want. The alternative project life cycle, as I mentioned, is this sometimes called the hockey stick, where we have too much time procrastinating, too many people in the team, not enough good people, too much planning session, too much talk, not enough action. Now, I mentioned the book Scrum, or the approach Scrum, earlier on. Now, this approach you can see on the screen here, this hockey stick approach, where we have a long period of thinking we're making progress, but then suddenly one day the senior manager comes in and says, where are we on this project? And he says, or she says, you've got to get organized and do something here. So it's like, right? There's a wonderful scene in a film I saw once, and the project manager comes in, and the project's a complete disaster, and the manager says, okay, let's not all panic. You and you panic, you and you stay calm, right? Now, we don't want panic in a project, as exciting as it is. So what we need to do is to drag the activity earlier into the project. And so Jeff Sutherland in the book here, Scrum, talks about this technique of sprints. And this is really good. I found this really effective too in some of my writing work, which is also interesting, where you put off writing for so long, and then the publisher phones up and says, is your book finished yet? And you do the whole thing in like a month, right? So what Jeff talks about in the Scrum model are sprints. So you identify short, measurable tasks that may take a few days or a few weeks that you can sprint towards. And then another one that you sprint towards, and another one that you sprint towards. So let's go back to think about, we're developing a new IT system. We're going to change completely the way HR is managed in an organization of 20,000 people, all right? So the first sprint would be to define management expectations and reporting needs. So amongst the senior managers in the business, we take a 1 week process and we deep dive into their expectations. Takes a week, bang. The second one is we need to understand the challenges and what people like or dislike about the current expense or HR system for the user's point of view. And that's maybe a week or 2 weeks because of the volume of people. And that's a sprint. So you get this idea of constant regular process. Now, some of you that are experienced with project management are thinking, yeah, but what about, isn't that just like a milestone? No, a milestone is a waypoint on the line to a bigger goal. It's a mile marker. It's not achievement in itself. So a sprint has to be like almost like a mini project. And you think of the project as a series of sprints, a bit like if you ran a marathon. You would think of a marathon, and I'm going to use some old references now, as 26.3 miles. I think it's about 52 kilometers, something like that. But you think of a marathon as 26 1-mile runs with a sprint at the end. And that's the best way of thinking of a large project, is breaking it down into these small projects, each one with a sprint element to it. Now, let's look at this and summarize this in more detail before we go for a break. At the beginning of a project, what you need is a charter. You need something that defines not just what the project is in terms of its deliverables, but how it will be run. Almost like this is a version of an organization will have a values, a vision, and a mission statement. Every project should have a vision for what the project is, a mission in terms of how it fits in to the bigger picture, but also the values. What's important to that team? Things like right first time, no surprises, clear communication. If you make a mistake, put it right. If you forget to do something, do it as soon as you can and say sorry. Sort of these kind of things, clear documentation, all that kind of thing. And it can vary, by the way, very much on the project management's team. So for example, two very simple examples, two very different project managers. One project manager I worked for many years was terrific manager. I mean, but I wouldn't say that when I was working for him. He had this rule: you never turn your phone off. You never turn your phone off, 24/7. Many a time he would call me very late at night. One of my colleagues was more technical than me, and one evening he got a call. It was about midnight, and he was in bed asleep. And the manager said, there's a taxi downstairs waiting for you. Get in it. You have to come to the office. We have problems, right? So he was one of the values of his project was you're always on. I had another manager, by the way, who would not expect you to answer your phone in the evening. If another colleague called you, you could quite happily let that go to voicemail and pick it up the next morning. So this is part of your project charter, and you need to initiate that with a series of formal meetings or kickoff meetings and so on. Phase 2, these are not, by the way, all equal. Part 2 is now we get into a detailed aspects of the scope, the budget, the work breakdown schedule, which is that big list of who's doing what, by when, and how. We can then turn that into a Gantt chart and maybe some sort of organogram, some communication plan of who reports to who and who needs to communicate, etc., etc. So that's part 2, and that can take, part 1 is relatively short in terms of time. Part 2 can take quite a long time depending on your project. By the way, here's a shortcut I will suggest to you. If you are involved in projects which may be similar from one project to another, keep the documentation, keep your charts, keep your breakdown structure, because they can be used as a base for future ones. Definitely. So for example, if you were going to do an advertising campaign, if you were a marketing manager, that would be a discrete project. But it wouldn't be unique to every other advertising campaign. Number 3, you launch. You need, of course, some form of tracking the success and the on-course elements of the project. KPIs will work for you, quality standards. You need to readapt forecasts. Very common on most projects is that you would put in a reforecast or report to senior managers on a regular basis, whether that's weekly or monthly or quarterly, depends on the project. But certainly you would need to keep that reporting going. Project 4, performance and control. Review and definition of objectives, quality deliverables, effort and cost tracking, and then some measure of performance. And then 5, the project close. Now, 4 and 5 in most projects are very closely linked. So once you've delivered the project itself, the building is done, the system is implemented, the users are happy with it, and the process is worked, all those little teething problems are done, then you are then to say the project is completed. More accurately, the project here is about a close and a kind of review of the project. So it's sort of post-project, right? It's like cleaning up after the event. And you've got to say, right, what have we learned? What will we do the same? What will we do differently? A punch list is things that have definitely punched the air with, that's great. And then we report that. We type that up, we record it into a video, we present it to senior managers, and we move on to the next project, right? If you don't learn the lessons of history, you are doomed to repeat them. If a project goes well, learn why it goes well. No project goes perfectly. Trust me on this. If you are a project manager and you think your project has gone perfectly, it's probably somebody somewhere in the project hasn't told you about some of the mistakes or some of the challenges, or rather you haven't found them out. So every project can be improved, of course. Now, it doesn't mean to say you start trying to find blame or you're trying to call people to account. It's just saying, look, if we ran this project again, how would we do it differently? And that's not for you to judge as a project manager. It's for the team to discuss and contribute. In a larger project, this, by the way, can take quite a few meetings and quite a bit of discussion. So I'm going to pause on this slide now. We're going to take a break now for 30 minutes. I'll make it just past quarter past the hour. And this is a good place to finish because this is the project life cycle. The sequence is important. So let's pause there, and we're going to come back and look at the more dynamic techniques of project management after the break.